In this video, I will show you how I was able to buy this bike for only $500, these two for $1,200, and this one for only $60. After watching this video, you will know all the little tips and tricks when buying a second-hand bike, as well as what to look for, what to avoid, and how to get the best bang for your buck, and not get screwed over. So let's get started. For those who have been following the channel, you know that I bought quite a few bikes in the past, and a lot of them I was able to get for a fraction of the price. So I can comfortably say I have some experience when it comes to buying and selling used bikes. And right in front of me is my new Enduro bike that I was able to get for only $1,000 from the original $1,800 that the seller was asking for. And it's not some crappy Walmart bike. It's a 160mm travel enduro bike with a 12-speed drivetrain, a dropper post, and all the goodies that come on modern enduros. Some of you already know what bike I'm talking about, so without any further ado, let me show you my 2021 Propane Tyee. And yes, I really got this bike for only $1,000, and here's how you can get one too. For the people that are just looking to get their first bike, buying a second-hand bike might be a bit confusing. So that's why I made this how to buy a used mountain bike checklist, which you can easily follow and be sure that you don't skip anything and you have the greatest chance of buying a worthy bike. I will leave the link where you can download the checklist for free so you can keep track of everything. So, okay, you found the bike that you think is the right one for you, and you're ready to meet with the seller. But there are a few key steps that you need to do before even calling the seller. First of all, you need to check the listing itself. You want to make sure it looks legit and not some scam, because if it's too good to be true, it most likely is. Make sure that the seller has put somewhat decent photos of the bike. Read the description in the listing. Just by reading it, you can clearly see if it's someone who rides bikes or not. Because why would someone sell an expensive bike if they don't even ride it? Unless they're selling their kid's bike, of course. Also, it would be nice if you can check the seller's profile to make sure he doesn't look like some crackhead, which could also be a red flag. A lot of times, this would give me some valuable information, like an estimated age of the seller, because if he's a kid, that means you can most likely negotiate a lot more than with an adult. Also, from my experience, kids tend to neglect the bike a lot more, because usually they don't pay for it, which is also something to be concerned about. Okay, only now you can call the owner. You always want to call the owner, never just message them. If the seller avoids the calls or won't give you his number, just find another bike. When calling, you should always say, "Hey, I'm calling about the bike that you listed." Why is this important? Because if it's a private owner, he will immediately know which bike it is. But if it's some dealer that resells the bikes, he will ask, "Which one are you asking about?" And this is really important because dealers can a lot of times mask something up so they can sell the bike faster, which is their job. Now, here are some questions I've written for you to keep in mind when talking to the seller, like, how long have you had the bike for? Why are you selling it? Does everything work? Are there any problems? You just want to make sure the story sounds legit to you, and also you want to make sure he is telling the exact same story when you meet in person as well as on the phone. Now, here are two crucial questions to ask at the end of the call. The first one is to ask him to send you a couple more photos of the bike, which will tell you the current condition of the bike. Because maybe the photos were taken a long time ago, maybe the bike has been listed for quite some time, maybe weeks or even months. And the last thing to ask is, what is the price again? Act like you don't know what's the price of the bike, because sometimes they will tell you a lower price than the one online, which means they are ready to give it for cheaper because they want to get rid of it. After he answers, you want to ask the following question. Is the price negotiable? And just leave it at that. Never negotiate over the phone. You want to leave all the negotiations for when you meet in person. When selling a bike in person, the seller is placed in a stressful situation with people that he doesn't know. So under those conditions, he's a lot more likely to make rash decisions and sell you a bike for cheaper. Okay, listing looks legit, seller seems legit. Now you want to schedule a meeting in some safe place and make sure you meet during daytime. If the seller is insisting to meet only at night, don't agree. Never buy anything at night. Also, it's a good idea to bring some tools with you, like hex wrenches, Torx wrenches, and shock pump. If you don't have any of that, you can just buy the cheapest multi-tool, and it'll still do the job. Once you meet with the guy and have a bike in front of you, you first want to make a visual inspection of the bike. Just follow the checklist and go buy it. So, we will start with the overall cleanliness of the bike. If the bike is dirty and muddy with rusty components, that's a good sign that the seller didn't take good care of it. And also, he didn't even bother to make sure that the bike is clean for you to see it. The most important and expensive part of the bike is the frame itself, so you want to start with that. Just go over the whole frame from all sides and make sure there are no cracks, dents, or weird wells if it's an alloy bike. You will definitely find some scratches, which is completely normal, but if the bike is covered in scratches like this one, you can use that to your advantage when negotiating later. Take a close look at the head tube, seat stay, and chain stay, as well as all the welds on an aluminum bike, because that's where most of the cracks appear. And obviously, if you see one, just walk away. Next up is suspension. If the bike only has a fork, then it's a lot more simple. Check stanchions for any scratches and dents. Small scratches like this one are not a big concern, but it still goes to your advantage when negotiating. Check the bottom of the stanchions for any fading or oil buildup. If there is some, that means that the fork hasn't been serviced often and permanent damage has been done. That's something you can't easily fix, and if it has severe fading like this one, then I would probably walk away from the bike. For full suspension bikes, the story is the same. Check for any scratches and oil buildup on the shock, which could be a cause of a bad seal, which can be a pricey fix. And the last thing goes only for bikes that come with a coil shock. On them, you want to make sure that the coil itself doesn't have a lot of chips on it, which means you will need a new coil soon. Next up are rims. You want to make sure that both rims are matching in make and model, because if not, that probably means someone has a nasty crash and has to replace one. Also, you want to give it a quick spin and see if there are any flat spots or dents, just like this one that you see. Also, check the spoke tension and look for any missing spokes. Lastly, give the wheel one more spin and take a look from above to make sure there is no major wobble. While you're there, check both tires. You want a tire that has plenty of thread, which you can easily tell by making sure that these channels are still visible, like in this case here. Also, when looking at the tread wear, you want to focus on the middle part of the tire. You don't want to focus too much on the side knobs because they wear out a lot slower for obvious reasons. Also, pay close attention to the sidewall of the tire. You want to make sure that it's not cracked like it is on my Propane. In this case, I would replace these tires, even though it's not really urgent, but I would still point that out to the seller. Now, when it comes to drivetrain, I don't really like to focus on the visuals too much. I just want a good, precise, and reliable drivetrain, but there are still a few things to check. Make sure that the chain ring, and cassette are not worn out too much. This is a little trick to check the chain wear if you don't have the right tool. Simply pull the chain at around 4 o'clock. If it lifts up a lot, like in this case, it means you need a new chain. When it comes to chain ring and cassette, you want to make sure that the teeth on them don't look like shark's teeth. Here is a good example of a worn cassette. But again, this is pretty normal for used bikes, and as long as it's shifting well, I wouldn't really bother much about this. But again, I would point this out to the seller later. Same story goes for a dropper post. You don't want to bother much about visual inspection of it. It just needs to work as intended. But since we are currently at visual inspection, we will leave it for a test ride to check how it operates. One thing that people tend to overlook are bolts. You want to carefully look at all the bolts on the bike, especially the special bolts that are used on the linkage of full suspension bikes, because sometimes they can get rounded off or stripped, which is not an expensive fix, but a really annoying one. So make sure all bolts are nice and tight and not rounded off. When it comes to brakes, you want to check the whole system, which includes discs, pads, calipers, levers, and hoses. For discs, you want to make sure that they are straight. A small bend is nothing to be worried about, and it's pretty common on most bikes. If you can, check the wear on the pads. You just want to make sure they have a decent amount of material left on them. For the calipers and hoses, just make sure they are dry and not oily, which could indicate an oil leak. And lastly, check the levers from a few different angles. Make sure they're straight and dry from any leaks. And the last thing to check when visually inspecting a used bike are contact points. This includes grips, pedals, and a seat. Each rider has their own personal preferences when it comes to these contact points. For example, you may be looking at the bike with clipless pedals while you're riding flats, or you might find the seat really uncomfortable, or the grips may be too thick for your hand. Also, they can just be in bad shape or might need replacement anyway. Personally, I'm really picky when it comes to this, so I pretty much change all three of them right away when I buy a bike. These are all quite cheap upgrades, but they can quickly add up, so make sure you check them. Okay, great. You checked the bike visually, and now you're ready for the second part, which is test riding the bike. First thing that you should ask yourself when you sit on a bike and take it for a little spin is, how does it ride and does it fit me? There is no point in buying a bike even if it's in good condition, if it's too small or too large for you, or its geometry simply doesn't suit you. When riding a bike, make sure to carefully listen for any weird noises and try to identify where they are coming from. Also, make sure to simulate some real-world riding. Don't be too gentle with it. After all, mountain bikes are supposed to be ridden hard. One of the first things that you should check on a test ride is suspension. Firstly, how does it feel? Don't be too concerned if the suspension feels too stiff or soft for you, because this can easily be adjusted later. But make sure it's smooth when operating. Also, make sure all the adjusters are working. Rotate both compression and rebound adjusters in each direction. When fully closed, rebound should make your suspension extend slowly, and when fully open, it should make it return fast, and it's usually marked with a red adjuster. On the other hand, the blue adjuster is known as a compression adjuster, which, when turned clockwise, makes your suspension stiffer, and when turned anti-clockwise, makes it softer. You should also listen for any knocking or any other weird sounds while cycling the suspension, which could indicate it's needing service, which can get pricey. Next up is a really common problem on almost every bike, which is play. It can occur in almost any part of the bike, but here are some of the most common locations like headset, linkage, wheels, and cranks. For the headset, simply pull the front brake and rock the bike back and forth quite aggressively. Listen and feel for any knocking from the headset area. This is a pretty common problem, but usually a really simple fix that you can fix just by tightening the stem cap bolt. If you're looking at a full suspension bike, lift up the rear wheel by grabbing the seat and do the same procedure, trying to feel and hear any play that should sound like knocking. You can also check for any side-to-side play by pushing the pedal of the bike, just like this, which will tell you if there is any play in the linkage as well as any other areas around it. Wheels are also a common component that can develop play. Simply grab the tire and move it side to side while feeling for any play in the hub, and don't be too gentle when doing this. And lastly, check the cranks by grabbing one end and rocking it back and forth like this. Almost every used bike will have some play somewhere, but usually they can be fixed really easily and inexpensively by tightening some bolts. Next thing you should check is the drivetrain. Make sure it's shifting in all the gears and it's working smoothly. From my experience, most of the used bikes will have some small shifting problems, which is not a big deal. It's usually just some cable adjustment or bent derailleur hanger. Just make sure it's not skipping when pedaling or things like that. And also remember to go hard on the pedals to really put some pressure on the whole drivetrain to make sure it's not going to fall apart. You should also be able to slow down that bike. So make sure the brakes have some power to them and the lever feels nice and firm. If it's soft and pulls to the bar, that means you will need to bleed the brakes, which is not a big deal if you leave it to the bike shop. Also check the adjusters on the lever if the brake has one, of course. Just make sure they're working and that you can actually feel the difference when turning them. If the brake doesn't have much power and is noisy, that probably means you will need to replace the brake pads, which will cost you a couple of bucks. Which is not a big deal, but keep all these pieces of information for later when negotiating. If the bike came with a dropper post, just make sure it's smooth, fast, and works as it should. There is not much to it. It simply needs to go down and stay there until you press the button again. There's always going to be some play in it, which is normal, so don't be concerned about it too much, especially if it's a lower end one. But if the dropper post is slow, saggy, and doesn't want to stay up or down, it's most likely needing servicing, which can get pricey and can be quite complicated if you want to do it yourself. And lastly, one really important step is to do a simple drop test. Just grab the bike and throw it from a couple of inches to the ground and listen for any weird noises. This is a really effective way to find if there is any play in the bike. You will most likely hear some chain slap and cables hitting, but that's normal. What you want to listen for is knocking. And with that, we've crossed everything on the checklist. The bike and the seller seem legit, the bike fits you and works well, with some small issues here and there, which is to be expected. And now we are ready for the fun part, which is negotiation. So in this case, the guy listed the bike for $1,800. Few weeks later, he dropped the price all the way to $1,500, which gave me a great sign that he wants to sell this bike quickly and is ready to take even less money than he's currently asking. So I got to work and hit him up. He told me that he will drop the price to $1,300 compared to the original $1,500, which was a really big sign that told me I can negotiate with him for even less than that. And I didn't even negotiate yet. He came to me with this offer first. When I came to check the bike, I saw that it was really scratched up. It had play in the headset, a pretty big dent in the front rim. The shifting wasn't great at all, and it needed new grips, tires, and a chain. So I will definitely be putting at least $300 on this bike to make it ride and look amazing again. So I pointed all the things I mentioned above to him, and I made an offer of $900, which he originally declined. But after a couple of minutes going back and forth, he agreed on $1,000, which is a steal for a bike with these components. One more pro tip is to always offer a little bit less than you originally would do, so you can go back and forth with him and meet at your original price. Keep in mind that some people are willing to negotiate more, while some are really holding firm on their price. In the next video, I will be completely restoring and painting this bike and turning it into a dream bike, so make sure to stay tuned and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it. I hope this video helped you with your next purchase, and I hope that you will find some great deals out there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.